What have we learned about digital equity during a pandemic, and what is the role of a company like Comcast? Today, we'll have conversations ahead of the Introduce conference. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Technically, a news organization with a community of technology professionals and entrepreneurs. Ahead of our Introduce conference on Thursday, May 12th in Philadelphia, we are hosting conversations around building better companies, what goes into it, the workforce, and the people around them. This event is taking place during Philly Tech Week, presented by Comcast. And so no doubt during a pandemic and coverage around technology, naturally, it's crucial to look at our large corporate citizens and people who are providing next generation internet and connectivity access to hear what the role they have in advancing those skills and the ecosystems they're a part of. So to have a conversation on that, I have Bret Perkins. He's Senior Vice President of External and Government Affairs at Comcast NBC Universal. Bret, thanks for being here.
Chris, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Bret, I've known you for a long time. We've had many a spirited conversation, both on and off record through the years. So, I know we can cover a lot of ground. Let's start with what we learned during this pandemic. We went into lockdown, remote learning took place. We also learned businesses and work dynamics and entertainment. In so many ways, we advanced what we learned about what access means. So, I'm curious, from your perspective, what is your diagnosis sitting where you are with what we learned about digital equity during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, and thanks for the question, Chris. I think when we start just with the idea that is the moment we knew that people are going to be working from home, kids were going to have to learn from school. Connectivity became the center of our lives, and number one for us was having an enormous workforce that we have both here in Philadelphia and around the country, making sure that they were safe, but then realizing that the folks who keep that network going, in the end, they were frontline workers. We ended up going through a period of unprecedented use of the network. So making sure that the network was operational was priority number one. Number two, then become connectivity for everybody, making sure that families and children could stay online. And again, we're in an unprecedented time. So we took some immediate actions. First was offering our Internet Essentials to new customers for 60 days for free. No one knew at that time how long this was going to last. The second was opening Wi-Fi hotspots. But over time, we realized that this was not going to go away. And so we kept evolving based on feedback from our partners. And Philadelphia was amongst the best. So the creation of lift zones came from our partners who said, look, we've got kids who aren't going to be able to go to school, and many of whom can't be at home. They need alternative spaces so they can do work. So we ended up creating lift zones. I've done 1,000 of them around the country, a significant number here in Philadelphia. That came from listening to others for trying to solve a problem that didn't exist, maybe 6 months before we ran into it. The creation of PHL Connected was an example of that. We had been working at Comcast on a project to create these essentially opportunities to buy in bulk, Internet Essentials in bulk. And when the pandemic hit, we ended up accelerating that really at the request of our partners, including in Philadelphia. And that led to us being able to partner with the city and a number of other folks to launch PHL Connected. So I think you start with hey, the network is everything. And then you get to connectivity for folks in a range of ways, including folks who up until the pandemic really sat on the other side of the digital divide.
I think you're getting at a point that came to in our in Techni's reporting, that separation of network infrastructure, connectivity to that infrastructure, and then use of that connectivity you have. And I know we at Techni have routinely followed those numbers on broadband access in all the cities we report on, Philadelphia being one of them. The city of Philadelphia had in the fall numbers that up to 85% of homes have high-speed internet. There's always a push to have more. I remember a decade ago when we were reporting on the dismal numbers of that being at or below a half, and there has been a real change. And there was a big surge in the pandemic. That number was 70% in 2019, up to 85% in 2021 as a snap survey of how many households in Philadelphia had broadband access. You guys were a part of that work. But you're also hitting on a point that we've learned at this stage. Fight one was getting the infrastructure up. Fight two was getting connectivity up. There's another stage of what do you do when folks have access to that? That seems like something you're getting at.
Yeah, and there's a continuum here. It's easy to talk about the networks, right? Everyone loves to talk about the bright, shiny object. In Philadelphia, I mean, we're fortunate. We have gig service here. Fios from Verizon is here. You have 5G networks that are here. We don't have a network access, issue in Philadelphia. We've had an adoption issue for a long time. In an adoption, meaning the network is there, getting people connected to it. That's more complex. And we've been dealing with that for the last 10 years. Learned a lot. We've done a bunch of research. We have some amazing nonprofit and government partners here that are focused on it. And that's stuff that, you really have to pay attention and understand. Sometimes that is because you have folks who, don't speak English as a first language. You have undocumented neighbors of ours. You have folks who are housing insecure. You have a whole range of trust when we say, hey, we have this deal for you. All of those things are what we were working through for a decade. And then we get to the pandemic. And pretty quickly, what we got through was we were going to need to do everything. And that included offering service for free. And that free offer has continued. It started with the work that we did with the city, with a series of really great foundation partners to launch PHL Connected. And then the federal government became a partner in launching the emergency broadband benefit and now ACP. And so there's a $30 subsidy for folks. So it is effectively free. But we still have people that aren't connected. Right? That means that there's more work to be done to understand the why for that. But Chris, if that's all that we do, and we've missed the big point here, because we can put networks and get everyone connected and still not have digital equity and get the full value out of having people connected to this technology. That comes with skills and use. Are folks trained? Do they have the ability to use this technology to, do a telehealth visit, do online banking, to get training, to open up a business, right? We can't stop at, hey, let's just get it connected. It really ought to be, have we got the right kind of skills for folks so they can utilize this to improve their lives?
It sounds like you might say, like, I was going to go to what is the next stage of the digital divide. If it was a connectivity story for a decade, the first decade of my reporting on this, that was always the conversation. Skills-based learning is what you're saying. Naturally, you ask then, how much does the senior vice president of external and government affairs at Comcast, how much is that then become something you think about?
Yeah, so I think we still have, if you think broadly, so we pull the lens back, we still have a network challenge in parts of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and parts of the country, right? And we have infrastructure dollars, and those dollars should go very specifically focused to close that gap, right? Where there are folks who don't have, a Comcast or a Verizon wire going in front of their house. So there's a thing to do there. That is not our challenge in Philly. We still have an adoption challenge in Philadelphia. I mean, you said it, the numbers have gotten, so much better. That is a credit to everybody who has done this work, but we still have a gap. So we can't take our eye off the ball that there are still folks that for any number of reasons aren't connected to the service, even though they have it in front of their house. But I do think that the place where we've got to put more attention is around the skills and the use of this. Right, we have an ecosystem evolving here. We want to be able to attract businesses and have small startups that have the talent and they can use this technology. We have a whole universe of entrepreneurs, single proprietors who now know that they need to have an online presence. What does it take to transition businesses and individuals from being able to turn on a computer to use that computer for things like a job or starting a business or getting an education or improving their health care?
I mean, how much does that become? How much responsibility do you feel in that next stage of it?
Yeah, so I always have the conversation in a way that says, let's start with the ecosystem responsibility. because it's a simple thing to say, well, Comcast, you're a tech company, you're based here in Philly, make it go away. But if let's take healthcare as an example, right? I say to my healthcare friends all the time, you have something that I don't have. You actually know who's not connected. I can generally tell you who's connected. But the people who aren't connected are the ones who are showing up to your emergency room. They're showing up to clinics, and they're not able to get an electronic health record. They're not able to do a telehealth visit. What is the responsibility for healthcare then? Same thing for education. Our schools, they know who more than we do who's not connected. If we have a subsidy that pays for it, you don't have to worry about, I'm going to be responsible for paying for it. That's been taken, care of in this case. It then becomes, how do we do the matchmaking? And that's a broader ecosystem. And I'll give you a great example. Banking's been ahead of the game on this. Banking, because it's important for them to get people connected to online banking, have used their tools for the last, really 5 or 6 years to spend money around digital literacy and getting people online. Not because they were trying to help us, but because it was in their own interest to have more people connected because they could become customers and use their services better. Right? If we're thinking about this and learning the lesson from the pandemic, the reason that PHL Connected worked so well is everybody did their part, right? And everyone realized that no one could do it alone, right? We have lots of tools, resources. We're a global company solving for this, not something we can do on our own. The city, lots of resources and people couldn't do it on their own. School district, our foundation partners, they can make the world move. But what ended up happening there was everybody came together. Nonprofit partners, foundation, city, school district, ISPs, including Comcast, to create something that sort of addressed the complex nature of this. And I think that's any of the big challenges that we have in Philadelphia or other cities. Big challenges don't come with some like, hey, here's the one thing, the one company, or the one solution. It's typically about collaboration to deal with the complexity and the scale of what you need to do. And I think we learned some great lessons here in Philadelphia. There's been a lot of trust built, and I think some, kind of good pathways for doing more in the future.
I'll pull up here just some reporting that we did on PHL Connected, advancing internet connections. It's your point of it is a case study of many stakeholders. There were, as is always the case, criticisms of did it go far enough and the like, but this is a point of pride of many stakeholders from our reporting that I can say many of you do view it as a real collaboration, points and criticisms taken. So tech talent, something that we report on a ton technically, sometimes correlates to acts of entrepreneurship, at least in high growth kinds of entrepreneurship. There's lots of kinds of entrepreneurship, but in our kinds of entrepreneurship, there's a conversation of do you draw a line between Comcast, NBC Universal being a large employer of many folks, including tech folks in many hubs you have around the country, Philadelphia being one of them. Do you draw a line between how you're, let me say it like this. Banking talks often that if we help the unbanked, some segment of those folks, we do hope will become upwardly mobile and become bank user customers of ours. Sure. Do you draw a similar line of we hope to move people from be contributors to people moving from digital access all the way to being heavy Comcast users and perhaps being an engineer at Comcast?
I think it starts with a bit of the DNA for the company. We're headquartered here, but we're in 6,000 communities around the country. We have employees who live, they work, they volunteer, they raise families in those communities. We're part of that fabric, right? And so while we're a big company, in the end, our presence is intensely local, and our investment was not pandemic alone driven. We've been in community investors since the very beginning. Ralph Roberts, one of the first things he did when he created Comcast was start a campaign to participate in United Way. And so when you look at our community impact, it's something where we've had relationships with organizations doing great work. It's not the stuff that we can do on our own, right? If we want our communities to be healthy, the places where our employees live, if we want to have customers, who can pay for our service, then we participate in it. And Chris, if you think about like long term for us, so We announced last year Project Up. And that's about what are we going to do for the next decade. We made $1 billion commitment around that. So this isn't like we see a thing and put your finger in the hole. It is thinking across time. How do we use what we can do to help the ecosystem? And that requires us to listen. So here in Philadelphia, I learned a lot from you and others. Chris Serra comes to mind, of people who would say, hey, not really seeing you, and there's more that you could do to be helpful. And here are some examples. And I think if you look at and trace over time, we've tried to be responsive to that. Not that we're going to solve everything, but I think we take serious the role that we can play here. And we're not going to get it right. But what you'll see is we keep coming back to it, and we'll show up in places, and we'll adapt and we'll innovate. And I think that makes us different than a lot of folks, but it certainly doesn't make us perfect.
Bret, thank you for the conversation.
It was great to be with you, and thank you for the conversation.
All right, we'll talk to you next time. See you, everyone.
All right, take care, Chris.